Hey, what's up? It's Tati and I'm back with another review of Dark Side of the Ring Season 1. This is episode 4, The Last of the Von Erichs. This episode went into why not only the Von Erichs were a very influential family in the wrestling world, but also why they were known for being cursed, kind of like how the Kennedys are when it comes to politics. Now, I don't believe in superstitions, but I do believe that they basically were the authors of their own fate. So a lot of bad decisions that they made, they took things into their own hands and ultimately led to their demise. And I mean, this was a very good episode. This episode was mostly with Kevin Von Erich. He's the last surviving brother out of Fritz Von Erich's sons. So he got to tell a lot about their lives. And although he's the last one surviving out of all his brothers, he said, you know, he felt very, very lucky because he got a chance to spend time with all these amazing people. And although they're gone, he has his memories of them to go on with. So this episode didn't really go much into Fritz Von Erich's career. They basically just stated that, you know, he was their father, how he was a monster heel as a wrestler, and how he was a promoter for WCCW, and basically a businessman and overall family man is what Kevin would describe him to be. The boys had a upper hand in the wrestling business, being second generation wrestlers, and they were able to see things backstage, and having a father who was not just a wrestler but a promoter, you know, really gave them a different perspective versus other people who didn't have any type of background in the wrestling world. They were really famous in Texas. Everyone loved them. The ladies were absolutely obsessed with them, and they were absolutely gorgeous, so definitely see why. And they really made a name for themselves for the short amount of time that they were around wrestling. And this episode we had the two stooges that I consider to be stooges, which is Dave Meltzer and Jim Cornette, you know, giving their takes. And as much as I'm not a fan of Cornette when it comes to talking about pro wrestling, just the facts, he knows it all basically, and it's really great to hear you know, him talking about certain things that other people may not be able to tell. He's a good storyteller as well. So this episode was actually really good. They also had David Manning, who was around when certain events did happen, so it was really good to have someone other than Kevin, who obviously experienced these things, be able to give their accounts on what happened. So with the brothers, we had Kerry. He was what they would say is the star of the boys. We had David, who was the best performer in the ring. Kevin was the most athletic of them all. And then we had Mike and Chris. They were there. We'll get a little bit into their careers a little bit later, but you know, right off the bat, they wanted David to win the World Heavyweight title, and they did not go into details really at all with David versus Ric Flair, and how he never was able to get that title from Ric. So I'll brush into that a little bit later, but David had to go to Japan and wrestle, and around this time he was not looking good. His brother mentioned how he looked really, really pale, and he complained of a stomach ache. And even Fritz Von Erich had stated to Kevin that he was throwing up, I believe, the morning that he left to go to Japan. And you know how it is with wrestlers, regardless of what is going on with them, they are going to get in that ring. And that's what he did. He got on the plane and hopped to Japan and had a match. I believe he did have a match. And unfortunately, his family did get that call. So the person who they were able to reach was David Manning. Someone from All Japan Wrestling had spoke to David and basically said, you know, David found dead in a hotel room. Didn't really give any details. He didn't really know what was going on, so David went straight to Fritz house. And as soon as he got there, Fritz opened the door and he said, "Which one?" So I guess he felt like something was going to happen. And he sent David Manning back into town so he can, you know, call Japan and find out what the hell happened and what can they do to bring David Von Erich back to the States. So Kevin talked about how he was having a hard time dealing with his brother's death, and that although he was known to be the oldest Von Erich, he was actually the second oldest. There was a brother who was the oldest. His name was Jackie, who passed away when he was 6 years old. He was electrocuted. The family lived in a trailer. He touched something on the trailer and got electrocuted and fell outside in the snow, ultimately drowning. And he stated that he saw his father so angry that he punched his fist through the car window, and that, you know, it reminded him of that moment when he lost his oldest brother and now he lost another brother. So David Manning did go back into town. He was able to speak to Bruiser Brody, who was there. He was the person who found David Von Erich's body in the hotel room, and stated that it looked like he was trying to get to the phone and he died like near, like, I guess, like the nightstand where the phone was, and he couldn't get to it. And Kevin also spoke to Brody over the phone, and he said he never forgot how it was talking to Brody, and Brody being a huge man, like the manliest man he knows, crying like crazy over the phone. He said he'll never forget what it's like to hear a grown man cry like that, and you know, that really affected him. So David's body was flown from Japan to the United States. They had a huge funeral for him where many wrestlers and fans attended. They stated 4,000 to 5,000 people had attended, and also schools in Texas were closed. That they had screens and speakers outside for the people who could not get in and pay their respects. There were women and children just crying. Line was just all over the place, people trying to get in. It was absolutely huge. Now, prior to the funeral and at the funeral, there were rumors going around about a overdose, and that he had overdosed. Many people had stated that Brody found him with I guess painkillers or whatnot. I don't think they specify exactly what it was, but even Mick Foley stated in one of his books that Brody did find some narcotics and flushed them down the toilet, so no one would able to find it and say that that's what it was. And although there were so much rumors about an overdose, the family decided it was going to wait for an autopsy report, which came back that he had acute enteritis, which is an infection in the intestines, and that the intestines ruptured. He bled internally, which led to heart failure. Soon after, David Von Erich was honored with the Parade of Champions, and at the time, this event had drew the largest crowd for a pro wrestling event in the United States, which had over 42,000 people in attendance, which was absolutely huge. And I have to mention, the show did a very horrible job at mentioning when things took place. I personally know it took place in 1984, but for those people who want to know when things happen specifically, you're gonna have to like whip out your phones and Google when certain things happen. But this event was very special because we had Ric Flair versus Kerry Von Erich, who was able to achieve something that his brother was not able to do, which was win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, beating Ric Flair. So he ended up winning, and obviously the family, the fans, everybody was definitely emotional because this is something that David obviously wanted to achieve, and he was able to do that in his brother's honor. It was absolutely amazing and so emotional to watch, just to see how everybody was just so happy, and that Kerry was able to live that moment for his brother. It was really, really special. So Fritz von Erich wanted there to be another von Erich, and he brought Lance von Erich, which was a bad idea. And Kevin, he stated that, he talked to his dad about that, this was a bad idea, that they were better off bringing another one of their younger brothers, Mike, to come in and being a wrestler. And to be completely honest, Mike was not great. But he had rather not deceive the fans and actually bring a real Von Erich to continue the family legacy. The fans were not buying it from the jump. They were not with it at all. And, that kind of tarnished their legacy a bit by not being honest about who was part of the family. Unfortunately, with Mike, he was not that great. So there was a match that he had in Israel against Gino Martinez, and he ends up dislocating his shoulder and having to have emergency surgery. He immediately went back to the States after that, and he ended up having a fever of 105, and his blood pressure was down, and he had toxic shock syndrome. And he had to be hospitalized. His organs started failing. It was just really, really bad, and the doctor stated that he wasn't going to make it, and that it was best that the family came and say their goodbyes while he was still conscious. And it was horrible. Everyone in town heard about it. People were calling the hospital, wanting to donate organs and give their blood so they can help Mike make it through. So many calls kept coming in, to the point that they had to get extra staff just to answer the phones, because people were so concerned, thinking that Mike was not going to make it had they not had perhaps a transplant or a blood transfusion to help him go through what he was going through at the time. So there was Gary Holder, who was considered to be the chaplain of WCCW, and he came out there and he was praying like a prayer warrior, just asking God to make sure, he makes it through, and whatever God wants him to do, they'll do it and whatnot. Kevin said he was not feeling the prayer. He didn't really think that a miracle would happen. And less than a minute after his prayer, the doctor comes in and say, Mike's vitals are looking better. His blood pressure is stable, and he might make it. It's a miracle. And a week later, he was discharged from the hospital. And like how wrestlers do, they want to get right back in the ring. He had big ass shoes to fill, and him wanting to be as good as his brothers, and probably knowing that he wasn't, he started drinking, doing drugs, and getting into trouble. And ultimately he had got caught by the police driving while drunk, and he had possession of marijuana in that vehicle. So he was taken to jail, and the family attorney did end up getting him released, and he was the last person to actually see Mike von Erich alive. And unfortunately, after days of searching for Mike, when he was scheduled to have a match, people thought it was very strange that a Von Erich would be late and not show up. So they had a search team and people around looking for him. They ultimately ended up finding his body, and he had an overdose. And Kevin talking about how it felt to know that his brother was dead after looking for him. He just looks so broken just talking about it, and even had to ask the producers to stop filming so that he can take a break. It was very heartbreaking to see that. So after losing another son, the family tried introducing Chris Von Erich to revive the family's image, not just in the ring, but after the tragedies that have happened with the other sons. They felt like that might have helped their image. Unfortunately, it did not. Chris was smaller, had a size disadvantage compared to his other brothers, and he also had asthma, and due to him taking asthmatic medications, he had brittle bones. And at first I was like, well, how bad can that be? He actually ended up breaking his arm, and him breaking his arm brought him into a deep depression. Obviously another brother, knowing he has big shoes to fill and he's not able to fulfill those obligations, trying to live up to what his brother's been able to achieve. So one day he calls Kevin in the middle of the night and said, I want my damn VCR back. And Kevin is just like, what? It's the middle of the night and you asked me about a VCR? I'll give it to you in the morning. And Chris gets up, gets on his four-wheeler, and kept driving around Kevin's house over and over again until Kevin got out of bed. And when Kevin got out of bed, he did not see Chris riding around the house anymore. So Chris had his favorite spot on their ranch where it was like a mountain top, and he liked to sit there and, be alone or whatnot. So Kevin decides to go up there and see what's going on. And Kevin goes up there and he's like, you're not here to kill yourself. I guess he said that like kind of like jokingly. And Chris actually stated, oh, did you read the note that I left? And apparently he did write a suicide note, but no one at that time read the note. So Kevin was trying to talk to him and said, you know what, please don't do anything. And Chris stated, all right, I promise I won't do anything. And Kevin regrettably left his brother up there and went back to the house and went to go talk to Fritz. And when he told Fritz about the note, Fritz was like, get your ass back up there and see what Chris is doing. And when Kevin goes back up there, he sees his brother laying down. He asks his brother, what did you do? And his brother stated that he took some pills. So Kevin is like, well, maybe I could save him. He just took pills, maybe get him to the hospital. They'll be able to do something. But he went to go lift Chris off the ground. So he put his hand behind his head so he can lift him up. And that's when he felt a hole in the back of his head. And unfortunately, Chris had already shot himself in the head, and his hand was just covered in blood, and he was touching where he shot himself, and he ended up passing away from that gunshot wound. And another brother gone due to taking their life after things was just not going how they felt like their life should have gone. And unfortunately, this was another devastating blow for the family. So time has passed, and Carrie Von Erich gets an offer from Benny Mac himself, and he is ready to sign them papers. Unfortunately, Carrie did have a secret. Years back, he had a motorcycle accident, and he was driving a motorcycle and hit a park police car, hurting his leg. So from his hip down to his foot. David Manning specifically stated that he was told that Carrie's leg looked like it was chewed by an alligator. That's how bad it looked. Although his whole leg, his right leg, was in really, really bad shape, the doctors were unable to save his right foot, and it had to be amputated. And anyone who knew about it swore that they would not tell a soul about what happened. Why? Because, like what wrestlers do, regardless of their injuries, they want to continue their careers. And that's exactly what he wanted to do, because obviously that WWF payoff was right around the corner, and he did get that call. And what did he do? He wrestled with one foot. And majority of people did not know this at all. Even people in the locker room did not know in what type of condition he was in. He was able to debut in WWF Although he was still called Kerry Von Erich, he decided to drop the Von Erich from his name, and he was known as Texas Tornado. And he did have a somewhat of a career there in WWF. Now, at this time, he was doing drugs, obviously. Who wasn't doing drugs wrestling during this time? But that was a big issue for him, because that was coming in, obviously, in between his life at home and his career. So he started talking about, you know, committing suicide, and Kevin kept trying to save his brother no matter what. He had one more brother left, and he was adamant on, you know, keeping in contact with him and making sure that he never got to that low point of his life where he would have taken his life. So it was, the only date they really actually touched on was February 17, 1993. So Kerry was to be indicted on some drug charges, and on that date, he didn't show up for court or anything. He went to Fritz Von Erichs' ranch, and he went to tell him how much he loved him and gave him a big hug. And he went into the house, and he left the house and went out into the field on the ranch. At this time, Kevin is blowing up Fritz's phone, saying, you know, if once Kerry gets there, just hold him off for me for a bit before I get there so I can talk to him. But Fritz was so busy pouring concrete that he wasn't paying attention to what Kevin was saying. So when Kevin get there, he's asking, you know, where is Kerry? And that's when Fritz gets, you know, suspicious. Like, okay, he was here, he left. Although he wasn't really paying attention, he started connecting the dots that maybe something might have happened. So they're looking for him, they're looking, and Fritz ended up finding Kerry's body in the field. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the heart, using the gun that he brought for his father for Father's Day. And that obviously must have hurt Fritz so much to know that he used what was considered to be a gift to him to kill himself. And Fritz stated that that was the most peaceful he ever saw Kerry looked ever. Shortly after Kerry had passed away, Jim Cornette had a conversation with Kevin, and Kevin stated that he used to have 5 brothers and now he wasn't even a brother. To say something like that is absolutely heartbreaking, to, you know, be at that point where you were surrounded by, you know, your loved ones, and now they're all gone. After his brother had died, sometime after, Fritz and his wife had split, so they were no longer together. Fritz had developed brain cancer, and he was not thinking straight. Once someone does have cancer, especially when it spreads to the brain, they end up doing things and saying things that they may not do. You know, they're not in the right state of mind. And I went through that with my mom, so I know how he felt. Like, him describing that was like, oh my gosh, like I totally understand what that's like. However, his father ended up pulling a gun on him and told him that if he had the guts to kill himself, he'll pull the trigger. And Kevin told him that it took guts to live, not to die. And Fritz was still just pointing that gun towards him. And Kevin stated that while it looked like his dad kept thinking about pulling the trigger, he decided to make a run for it and leave before he can actually ended up killing him. And he stated that he was happy when his father passed away because he was no longer suffering. And it's not like because he hated him or anything like that. He stated that he had a great father. Unfortunately, he just didn't want him to be suffering with cancer anymore. So he did get to a point where he was absolutely depressed. He lost his father, lost all his brothers, and he had no idea what to do. And according to him, he didn't want to take his own life, and he thought the next best thing was for him to be incarcerated. So he decides to go to a gun store and steal a gun, because he knew that if he were to take a gun, he would have been locked up for a long time. He goes, takes the gun, and as he's leaving, the owner of the store and like a small group of men just watching him walking out. And the owner states, I love you, Kev. And Kevin just walked out and sat in his car. And he said, had the man not said that, he would have, you know, made a decision that he regretted. And he said that saved his life, by that man telling that he loved him. And at that moment, that was what he needed to hear. So he left his car and went and returned the gun. He now lives in Hawaii, where he has 2 sons and grandsons and granddaughters too. Where he lives is absolutely beautiful. It looks like paradise. His sons look just like him and his brothers when they were younger. He had his last match on July 17, 2017 with his sons in where was it? Israel. And he was happy that that's how his career ended. So the producers did ask him a question if he felt his family was cursed. He said no, and I definitely agree. They all made decisions based on things that happened in their lives, and unfortunately, aside from David and Jackie, the oldest, the other brothers, you know, they unfortunately was at that point of their life where they felt like they did no longer want to live. This was a legendary wrestling family, and very great episode. I obviously did not like the fact that they didn't mention dates like they should. If you really want to keep up with what was going on, they didn't do a good job with that. But other than that, it was a great episode. Thanks for watching my review. I'll be back with episode 5